I don't get to do call and response with tech audiences at most of the conferences that I go to, but this audience seems real primed for that, and I got a...
I love that.
Yeah, I got one. Who likes human rights? Yay! Uncontroversial. That's a good place to start. Dr. Noble, thanks for being here with us today.
It's such an honor. You're such a great journalist. I really feel lucky to get to be interviewed by you.
Thank you.
No pressure.
Right.
I know.
And I know that once you and I start to break things down, we can be at this for a while. This can take hours, really. But I'll just jump into these questions here. You know, you're well known for your AI research, particularly your book, Algorithms of Repression, which explains how search engines reinforce racism and sexism. For those who aren't familiar with your work, can you explain how AI can reinforce historically existing systems of inequality?
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to do that. I know a lot of you out there, it probably feels like old news now that algorithms and AI can discriminate, because we've been in this conversation for quite a while, but at the time that I started studying large-scale digital media platforms, I don't know, 15 years ago, when I would argue that at the level of code, we were embedding all kinds of values. And of course, everyone here who is a coder knows that you know, code is a language, many languages that we code in, and we have lots of artistry and lots of power in the way that we articulate in computer code. Now, when 15 years ago, if you said that you know, an algorithm could discriminate or that it held racist or sexist values, everybody would say that that's impossible because code is just math. And that was really what I was met with for many years. But in the book, Algorithms of Repression, I really show a number of different ways, particularly focusing on search engines, because I like to study the boring, banal thing that everyone takes for granted and doesn't really think that like there's a there when there's a lot there. Yeah. And what I found over many years of study was that when you did certain types of keyword searches, particularly on people's identities or groups of people, Black girls, Latina girls, Asian girls were almost exclusively misrepresented with pornography. People couldn't understand why that was, why when you searched on Black girls you'd get porn. They'd say, well, it's just because that's what everybody's looking for. And I'd say, well, what about the Black girls? Is that what they're looking for? Mm-hmm. And so really taking the time in that book to describe, first of all, how search really works, what it is in terms of an advertising technology, and what the implications more broadly of that are when we neglect to either check for or test for certain types of results, or when the data that we're using to train systems has all of the historic legacy of racism and sexism that is training it. And really, that's kind of the fast forward. If I were to write that book today, I'd have a lot more to say about training data, which you all know a lot about. But of course, all of the legacies of discrimination are in that data too.
Right, and we certainly see that in large language models and different forms of generative AI as well today. You know, when you and I spoke a few months ago, you repeatedly expressed a concern about big companies dictating policy to government. How do we ensure that public agencies and regulators don't fall victim to industry capture in this important moment?
They just should not fall victim to industry capture. So we all saw the new AI, the United States AI policy board that's going to advise the US government. And I just saw this a few days ago, and every single major tech company CEO is on it. So I don't think you can get more captured. I feel like if you opened up the dictionary and you were like, what does industry capture look like? You'd put that board right there. So that's a challenge, because what we need are people who are going to stand in as representatives for the people of the United States of America, and more broadly, the places where the technology that emanates from this country, where the people who are touched, who have very little impact and representation to put up any kind of guardrails to the tech companies kind of doing whatever they want to do. And I think, this is for sure, we're in the kind of fox guarding the hen house phase of big tech. We could look to big oil and we could see how that worked out for us. Not so well. So I think,
Smokers.
yeah, we're going to have to really, both the people who work in government are going to have to be those guardrails for us, but also for sure every type of advisory or every type of platform we can get for the public to make visible human rights violations, civil rights violations, consumer protection. These are things we desperately need. We don't have very good mechanisms right now for the public to be protected, maybe with the exception of the Federal Trade Commission, but I think even there's a lot of inertia trying to slow down Chair Khan.
Yeah, and certainly for all of the wow moments of AI in the last few years, I think certainly in the work that both of us have done, the word power is what emanates out of all of these conversations about how to keep people safe and protect their families and communities.
Yeah, I want to say too, because your work has been so important, and it's really been, as far as I look out, journalists and academics and activists who have been the kind of moral guardrails, or at least the people who are amassing the mountains of evidence to show the harm. And if we didn't have people like you and our colleagues doing that work, I don't think we would even have a power analysis. We wouldn't be able to even put a finer point on what that looks like.
Yeah, thank you. Well, later today, Governor Newsom is going to speak at the Generative AI Symposium in San Francisco. I took a quick look at the agenda. I don't see many critical voices from people who call California home on the agenda. I'm on my way to that after this, but...
Can we get you on the agenda? No pressure.
This is all to ask, why, in your opinion, why isn't government work, in your opinion, apolitical?
Well, one of the challenges that we have and that we're living under is kind of this, I don't know, last 50 years of really intense deregulation in the public and by governments, municipal, state, especially state and federal. And what's happened is we have now a state government, I think, and federal government and other states that are have made so many tax breaks and have created so many incentives for various industries, but especially the tech industry, that it's really put us in harm's way in a lot of ways, because of course the tax base, the corporate tax base, pays for a lot of really important things that we all need, like roads and schools and universities and healthcare and all of the things that we need. And that's really, really important. And so at the same time that all of us as individuals are paying more taxes, which I will tell you, I'm a person who's willing to pay taxes because I don't really want the potholes on my street. I don't want to have to be responsible for paving that part of the street in front of where I live. So it's okay for us to pay taxes, but it's not okay for the tech sector, which is the most powerful industry on planet Earth, to really not pay taxes. And in some cases, we've seen them get tax refunds. So we have to ask ourselves, why is it that they have the most powerful lobbyists in the world, that certainly in this country, and they're able to effectively get out of their fair share of contribution. And I think that without government holding companies accountable for paying taxes, for not offshoring all of their profits, for protecting consumers from harmful products, we're going to continue to be, I think, in many ways going down the wrong path, or there certainly won't be anyone there to provide some checks and balances on that. And we're deep into that. And so the best thing we have going for us, though, right now is Gen Z, because they're really not having it. So, that might be a place where we start to recuperate some losses.
Yeah, we're all rooting for them. What sort of AI do you think is having a positive impact, or do you find promising? And what forms of AI keep you up at night?
I'm going to start with the second one because that's easier. You can see I'm no fun at a dinner party when everybody wants to talk about AI and tech, but I'm really concerned about the environment. I would say if I had one headline, the recent research that's come out is showing that one prompt into a generative AI model like ChatGPT or something, it's the equivalent of pouring 5 glasses of water on the ground.
Yeah.
One prompt. So the water intensity and the kind of environmental costs of generative AI, I think we will look back in 50 years and say it wasn't worth it if we get the 50 years. So I'm very worried about that. At the same time, I think that if we're going to use these technologies, we should put them in service of solving really big problems like climate change. So those, I can see with my colleagues at UCLA, for example, those who are using AI to really study weather patterns and to help us think about planned migration and things that we're going to have to really attend to and solve problems for hundreds of millions of people, if not billions of people. So I think those dimensions of AI are less well understood, and that could probably hold some promise for us because we need all the knowledge we can get to solve big structural problems. At the same time, we've got a lot of trinkets of AI that seem fun. I mean, think about the promise of a great chatbot to seem human when all we want when we call the bank is to talk to a person. So it's like these weird trade-offs, and of course, yeah, representative. I'm that big boy. I love that commercial because it's like trying to get to people is the thing we actually want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's pretty relatable. I think we've all been in a place where we're trying to speak to a human, but go down this rabbit hole of being forced into a place of automation for efficiency gains and things of that nature.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I can really claim the efficiency gains. It depends on who you're asking. Are you asking people who are living in places where their islands, indigenous people where their islands are flooding and they can no longer live, or they're living in places with intense fires and those places are becoming uninhabitable? So we need a broader lens on these projects. If we had a bigger lens and we just weren't thinking like middle-class Americans, we would account for all of those factors, and then we would say these are deeply inefficient, probably.
Yeah. I was surprised. I spoke with somebody for a story on teachers using AI that's due out soon to hear someone's critique, and part of their critique was the climate change impact for the kids that will be, serviced with this technology.
Yeah.
We've got time for, I think, I'm going to squeeze one in quickly. How do you think governments can ensure accountability from vendors who are signing government, contracts in the procurement sector? How can we ensure accountability in the age of AI?
So the University of Oxford shared out, there's a commission on AI and good governance, and they've got a really easy to read white paper on how people who work in government can think about AI, and one of those aspects is procurement. That is such a powerful place where the review of contracts and kind of the not signing away of all the rights, the privacy rights and the other kinds of data broker engagement in different kinds of products. We may at some point see data brokers go out of business because there's so much concern about the constant 24/7 selling and trading of our information. So I think, believe it or not, in addition to technologists, lawyers and people who read contracts have a lot of power in helping us not sign away all of the public's rights. In particular, government workers, I think, government is a huge market for the tech sector, for the industry. So that's a really powerful place where people can, again, refuse certain types of new technologies. I will tell you that coming out of the lockdowns around COVID, UCLA offered us Slack as one more channel to be in touch with our students after we had been on Zoom for 10 hours a day. And no one wanted any more email, Slack, Zoom. So I think, no shade if Slack is a sponsor, by the way. I don't really know. I didn't check the banner. But I will just say that, you know, I think what we are so desirous of is having constituents, people who will be given these technologies, to also be able to weigh in and say, actually, what I want is less of that and more, again, I want more TAs. I'd like to hire more people. I'd rather have more jobs for my grad students, my undergrad students, than more technology that I have to manage, that I need more students for to help me get through. So, you know, those kinds of things are really, in the day-to-day, for those of us, we're just day-to-day workers. We aren't necessarily the decision makers for the University of California or for any organization that you work in. We do have ways to kind of refuse participation with different kinds of tech. And I think that that's something we should be mindful of, and not just see that we don't have any say as individuals. We got to work at our level and then also together at the systems level.
The right of refusal.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're often, as professors, encouraged to have our students use Turnitin, which is kind of a plagiarism checking software. And a lot of us who work, you know, around, let's say broadly, information and tech, we refuse to put our students' papers, and we just tell them don't use it when you're in our classes, because the thought of a student writing their, and I know no one here has ever written a half-baked paper for a professor ever, or a teacher, but just imagine that you had, and then it goes into, let's say, a searchable database down the line that your employer could find, or your kids, I don't know. So, or you, because no one wants to read the papers we wrote when we were 19. So I think, you know, the kinds of implications of how these systems can follow you through the course of your life is also really important. Not everything that happens at any given stage of your life should follow you your entire life. And this kind of right to be forgotten is really important, because nobody wants the thing they did, the worst mistake of their lives at any given moment, to be a really central data point in some other system down the line.
Right, and to your point about data brokers, something can get retained and just exist forever.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And paint a deeply distorted picture of who we are.
Yeah.
And, you know, if there's nothing greater to me in terms of the loss of human agency than the so-called digital profile, and the many digital profiles that really don't accurately or fairly represent us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, let's look to the future. You've advised governments and regulators for years, and forecasted a theme that's present in a part of our present moment that we should take serious: how AI can harm people and reify the power of businesses and governments that deploy that technology. How do you think AI and efforts to regulate the tech will be in 5 years?
I think we have to assume a couple of scenarios that will be radically different from each other. I think there's one scenario, depending on the election outcome in November, where there's a stronger enforcement of President Biden's executive order on AI, where every agency is trying to grapple with and really figure out what they're going to do with that executive order and operationalize it to protect the public. And that's going to be hard work over 5 years. I think there's another scenario where we might have very few government workers. I think, you know, there could be a massive decimation of government workers, agencies that aren't headed by people who are actually invested in those agencies. And, I should say here that I know that people who work in government, especially technologists in government, often feel that their work is apolitical, and that, they're kind of just working whether a president wants big government or small government. But the truth is, if you have small government, you don't have services for the public, and you don't have people who can implement those services and those protections for the public. So I think we have to think about two very, very different scenarios. It's no secret that we are on the precipice of a total collapse of democracy in the United States. So 5 years from now could be, well, I don't know. Is everyone moving to California? Don't do that. I don't know. But, it's like, it could be a really, really tough moment in 5 years. I want to believe that we will make choices at every level of government that are on behalf of protecting people, the environment, the economy, democracy, civil rights, that we will not embrace the worst of ourselves, but instead the better.
Yeah.
And that we'll think like other places. I think about places like New Zealand, where they are writing AI policy, and they, not only is the earth a stakeholder, but also they write policy that has to stand for 7 generations. So 7 generations out, they're thinking about what is the good policy for today. And I think we have a lot to learn from other parts of the world that could really help us do better than just the 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Noble, thank you so much for
We're
your
out of
time.
Thank you. I hope this is a great
And enjoy your summit.
Everyone. Thank you. Thank you.